What's up, everyone? It's Alex Plink from Dallas Sports Fanatic, and I am joined today by Rangers color commentator CJ Nitkowski for the Texas Rangers. CJ, thank you so much for taking the time to discuss the Rangers' past, present, future, baseball future. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Alex. Lots of free time now. I wish we were calling games and watching games and you were writing about games instead, but we'll take what we can get, and hopefully we're back to normal here pretty soon.
Absolutely. And I mean, based on some of the things that are coming out for this week is such a pivotal week in Major League Baseball. Out of your personal expertise, do you see, based on what you're seeing, reading, do you feel good about progress being made this week, or is it still in that 50-50 shrug your shoulders, I don't know type?
No, I'm pretty confident, and I think that people around the game are pretty confident that they're going to get something figured out here between the players and the owners, and that we're going to get baseball here, hopefully in July, outside of any major setbacks. And I just, it doesn't feel like it, right? There's a couple of things that were leaked early on, kind of gave you the impression that the union was ready for a fight, and there were some good reasons for that. And then, I think as we find out this week exactly what the proposal is going to look like, perhaps that was a little bit of an overreaction and maybe unnecessary. And so that would be good news too. I think there, it's a reaction to leaks is probably not such a great thing, because at that point it's really only hypothetical. And I think there was some pessimism there. And first and foremost, we have to make sure that we can play, right? And as far as the safety protocols and everything else, then there's the part of actually getting things worked out between the players and owners, and then everybody's happy and ready to kind of move forward. I think the safety protocols part of this will easily be covered. I think Major League Baseball went above and beyond, and I think some things in there that'll probably even back off of eventually. But it was the economics and that part of it that I think got people a little bit nervous in the beginning. But I'm definitely optimistic. I've been optimistic this entire time. As much as this has been a really difficult time in our country, we always overcome these kinds of things. And then when it comes to the idea of actually getting baseball back, just like we have had when there were other national tragedies, we find a way to get our sports back. It's a really big part of the fabric of what we do in our country. And certainly from a governmental standpoint, it does seem like a lot of politicians are behind the idea of getting sports back, as you see a lot of states opening and talking about it. And it doesn't matter which state, in New York, California, Texas, where I'm at right now, in Georgia, Florida. It had nothing really to do with politics. All of these government officials want to see baseball back, and all sports back for that matter. So that also gives me optimism that we'll be ready from a safety protocol standpoint. And we'll see how the rest of this week goes. It is a big one, but I feel pretty good about what we've heard so far.
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, the key is, do you feel comfortable? Everybody wants to play. And so the key is finding that compromise between playing, economic standpoint, and then safety. And you're trying to mesh all that together. And honestly, nobody knows, because nobody's been in this situation before. So there's no blueprint on how to make this work.
Yeah, it's going to be different for sure. And just because you're also going to have guys with different opinions, using the safety protocols as an example and what Major League Baseball is suggesting. For me, I think that a lot of those things, and some of them came across as, you must do this. It probably should be more, we would like you to do this. Here's a recommendation from us. And then the teams from the very top, and using the Rangers as an example, starting with John Daniels and working your way down to all the players and the staff that are going to be involved, and having a big conversation between everybody, engage where each person is at and where they are as a group. And because it's just like any other, you grab any group of 50, 60 people right now from around the country, and you're going to get varying opinions of what they think is the safest way to do things. And so getting a feel for how your clubhouse is looking at the situation, what's most important to them, what they would like to see their team do, what would make things more stressful for them and try to avoid that, whatever it may be. So many of these different things that you've heard that could be out there from the safety side, I think that becomes really important. And so that each team is on the same page and everybody feels good about what they're doing. And then individually, all 30 teams come to kind of their own conclusions. I know they have to interact on the field, but once you step between the lines, you have to go play baseball, the idea of worrying about, should I slide into this guy? Can I say hi to this guy? And whatever it may be, those things are just going to be natural after that. And they need to be. I think if you try to force some behavior that's not supposed to happen in between the lines, it could get awkward for players. They're going to forget sometimes. And do they really want to be on television when they forget that they're not supposed to spit, but they do it anyway because it's a habit? And then all of a sudden everyone's tweeting at Major League Baseball or calling the commissioner's office or writing reading, bad articles or whatever it may be. Those kind of reactions, I think, need to be probably softened, and open minds need to be kept, will be really important as well as they kind of go through all of this. But I do believe, I'm a big believer in the teams kind of coming to their own conclusions and how do they feel, and they're grouping it because it affects their families as well, right? If they say, hey, when we go on the road, we just really prefer that guys not go out. I understand if you feel like you want to grab lunch, like what are our protocols going to be? Because it's not just about you, and it's not even just about your teammate, but then it's about your teammate and your coaches and their families and how this thing can spread so quickly. And so I think that becomes really important so that there's no tension, no resentment toward any teammates. That conversation, I think, needs to be had. Everyone needs to be open and honest. And once they get there, then we can go forward and play baseball.
It's a family. And so just like for us, for everyday folks, just respecting that for your family, especially if you're living in a household with other family members, you take that respect out. Players will do the same thing. It's all a united together. And that's ultimately, the hashtag Together We is there for a specific reason. It's Together We as one for not just the Texas Rangers, but really for all 30 teams.
Yep, no doubt. I think it's going to be a really big part of it. Like I said, that good communication between everybody and however you feel that it's heard and that it's respected, right? I think that's really important as well. And that doesn't always happen in the clubhouse necessarily, but these are really sensitive times. And I think the modern team and the modern player is better about that, being open-minded and letting everybody's voice be heard. And then again, like I said, there may be guys on certain teams that aren't happy with how their team is handling it, but they're still deciding to play. And just like you should respect a guy if you have one person that wants to be really overcautious, then you have some guys that are maybe throwing caution to the wind. And how do you meet in the middle? And both sides need to be respected so that when the one guy's like, listen, I am showering here, or I'm not wearing a mask on the bus, or whatever it may be, and while you would like, if the team decides that they're doing that, then you should do it, and it should be respected. And whichever way they go, whether they want to be really cautious or maybe not as cautious as some people think, but whatever the kind of rules are that they establish among themselves do need to be respected.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see how things go. Now, as a former player, you look at some of these protocols, and it's got to be some of those. I know there's tweaks that could happen. Players, some of them voice their opinions, and they're not too keen on it. And like you said, some players will just kind of, for better term, suck it up and just deal with it as it is. But as a former player on the list, I mean, how difficult is it going into an everyday sort of scenario? I mean, you're playing for 6 months on a regular season, and now all of a sudden this is changing. Who knows how long, too? This may just be, they may amend this at some point when things ease up a little bit. But as a former player, how difficult it is, because that's an extra mindset, I would think, because everything comes so natural that now all of a sudden you're planting another thing in your brain that could cause a little distraction.
Without a doubt. And so, like I said, just the idea of, spitting as an example. Nobody's trying to spit coronavirus around the ballpark, right? And nobody, of course, would with any intention do anything like that, but it becomes such a habit. And I think for a lot of fans sitting at home saying, well, come on, you can't stop spitting. I mean, I still catch myself doing it at times. It's a disgusting habit, just like chewing tobacco is a disgusting habit. And that certainly exists in the game. That was in there as well. I understand why guys do it. I'm not a tobacco chewer myself, but I understand some guys will tell you that they can't play baseball without it. That we had a rule a couple of years ago where it was supposed to be that tobacco was kind of getting phased out of the game, and it was only players that were grandfathered in, and people probably don't remember that because I don't think it's really been enforced. And I'm not a big believer in enforcing that anyway. Talking guys out of it and having conversations and warning them the dangers of smokeless tobacco, absolutely. I wish nobody used smokeless tobacco in any scenario, but that's not reality. And so that's an example of one that I think that could be tough for some players, and maybe it's one that's not enforced. The idea of not showering at the ballpark, the new Rangers stadium in the clubhouse, those showers are individual, right? It's no longer one big shower room there. They're separated by walls, and I know the guys are getting dressed and doing everything else in the clubhouse, but I think that's something that they'll probably want to see not become mandatory, but an option. And just like I said, as an example, for a player who's not comfortable showering and just the scenario there doesn't work for them because of, how they perceive what's going on or whatever dangers they feel like they may be in from the virus standpoint, okay, then that guy doesn't have to shower there.
Yeah.
But does that mean the other guy is told he absolutely cannot? He has to drive home in his uniform. You got to get back in the bus in his uniform and take care of your laundry and everything else there, that kind of thing. And that's how it's done in Asia. I played in Japan and Korea, and that's not uncommon there when you're on the road. You get dressed at the hotel, and you get back on the bus after the game, and you wear your uniform back to the hotel, and you grab your bag and you throw your laundry outside, and somebody comes by and picks it all up. And so it's not something that's not done in the game, at least in different parts of the world. But little things like that, I think, for the players, high five, like lack of high fives. I'm not here to have a science debate, but I just don't think it's necessary. Daily testing doesn't seem necessary. Seems a little bit strong. Right. I understand you want to protect everybody, no doubt, and baseball's doing a really good job. But there's some things in there that I think will probably get relaxed to some point, and there's some things that are going to make playing the game a little bit more difficult for the guys. And so I think that comes up a little bit. But sitting apart 6 feet in the dugout, that's unrealistic. It doesn't make sense because you're going to be closer to other parts anyway. So it's either we can play or we can't. I know that original idea of not even having the players in the dugouts and going back to spring training or playing in Arizona, that's probably too much. Like, if that's really necessary, like if we have an agreement within the science community that that's really necessary, then we probably shouldn't be playing baseball. So I think that the idea that they came out with the most stringent things that they could think of so that we could only kind of trim it in one direction, which is okay. Exactly. We can relax this and we can relax this, as opposed to, well, they really overlooked this. How could they miss this? And to me, that seemed to be the approach with MLB. And I think ultimately we come to a resolution where a good handful of these things are relaxed.
How do you think it's going to, because I feel like it's pretty ironic. Globe Life Field's first season, home opener, attendance 0.
Yep.
How is that going to be as far as a pitcher, when you're on the mound and your mind is focused on the game, you're so used to everything around you, but everything around you is pretty much silence.
Yeah, it's going to be awkward.
Is that going to get in your head?
Well, I mean, for all these guys, they played at minor league stops where there hasn't been a lot of fans, maybe a day game in Oakland on a travel day where there hasn't been very many fans, and it doesn't seem loud at all. Now, I know it's not total silence in those spots, but there certainly are some places that they've played where there haven't been fans. It'll seem really awkward, especially when you're in that big, beautiful building, and there's no doubt that players feed off the crowd, especially in big moments. If you're standing in the box with an opportunity to drive in a big run, if you're trying to close out a game or finish off a big inning where you had gotten into a jam, all those kinds of things where the crowd really can propel you through it a little bit with some of that adrenaline that you pick up. It's not going to be there. It's going to be different. It's going to be an adjustment. The question becomes, what do we do from a ballpark entertainment standpoint for Chuck Morgan and his staff? Are there some things that they'll do differently? The idea of having more music played, I think, is actually a good idea, maybe a little bit more like the NBA or NHL style. What about pumping in crowd noise, whether it's through the PA system or through the television broadcast for those that are sitting at home? I think that's a possibility, but I think we do want to probably avoid that dead silence if we can, to some degree, and then also probably not take it too far where it seems, kind of cheesy and really out of place. I mean, it's going to be different, probably at every ballpark, and even for every network, as we kind of feel our way through and figure out what's the best way to do this. But no doubt that'll be a challenge for these players as well.
Will they pull an NC Dinos, have cardboard cutout people behind home plate?
Well, it's interesting. So the idea of doing that or making it even fun for fans, another way maybe to generate some revenue. Obviously, don't go crazy as far as crushing people. How much would it cost, to have my face on a full figure? Would I pay $25 to pretend that I'm sitting behind the stands, and every time they went over the dugout, you would see me there as a picture of me to cut out? That might be fun for fans. The idea of additional advertisements, I think, are some things that we'll see. Perhaps what they, think about what they've done in other ballparks, like when we go to Oakland and Mount Davis is covered with tarps, and they've done it in Cleveland. They do it in Tampa. We probably would see some of that. And there's some opportunity maybe for some advertising revenue as well, as far as making the stadium not just look like it's a bunch of empty seats. Are there different things that you can do? And I think we'll see teams try a lot of different ideas.
That's actually, good business idea. Just have a T-shirt, have somebody T-shirt of your advertisement, have cardboard cutout people. Boom, big revenue.
Yeah, if you wanted to have, say, one advertiser buy a whole section or buy a few rows, right? And everybody's wearing their Cars.com shirt or whatever it may be, or like I said, or I think we'll maybe even see some of that on tarps covering seats. There'll be a lot of different ways. And while everybody wishes that it was fans, that is a way probably to make it a little bit different. Have a little bit of fun with it as well. Yes. I think certainly there's lots of opportunities for creativity.
Absolutely. And you kind of see how each ballpark's team does as far as creativity goes, not just as far as music choices, but just overall. Have some fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bridge over as far as last season going into this season goes, 2019. As far as the Texas Rangers, this is a team that didn't finish. They finished kind of what some people thought, a little bit better. But as far as the process as the team went, this is a team that in late June, near the top, actually was tied at the top in the American League wild card with Tampa Bay. And then I would say from my perspective, a new manager, new hitting coach, new pitching coach, successful season. And although the team was decimated by injuries late in the season, I feel like it's a building block to what should be a good move for Ranger fans to kind of look at the future.
So there definitely were some big steps, I think, taken forward. We would love to have seen Joey Gallo get that first full season in of kind of the new version of Joey Gallo. It was amazing to see what he had done those first 3 months. It was certainly exceeded my expectations, right? You look at a guy and you say, okay, you get into a certain amount of plate appearances and at-bats, and he probably tells you who he is. There may be some outliers here and there. There may be a bump up, a bump down, but you have a pretty good idea what the range could be. He completely blew that away last year. To see the adjustments that he made with his discipline, the idea that he was hitting for average without giving up any of his power was absolutely incredible to see. I'll be honest with you, I didn't think that was ever going to be something that we could see. Now, we didn't get to see it for the entire season, but no doubt that he believes the changes that he made are real. Trying to come back with the oblique was a little bit of a challenge, and he couldn't quite get to where he was, but I think that's certainly understandable. So I think we're all very curious and anxious to see this new version of Joey Gallo. Now, again, it's not going to be wire to wire because we're not going to play 162 games this year, but that was a necessary step as far as really figuring out what you had, right? Then the trade with Nomar Mazara to see how this outfield starts to kind of take shape to some degree, and then go ahead and put Joey in right field, which to me is a great spot for him with that arm. That's where you probably best utilize the big arm that he has. Although it was fun to see him in center, although you worried about him over the long term wearing down with that big body, but that arm also played really well there. We saw it a handful of times where either he made really good throws and threw guys out, or we just saw guys stop trying to go first to third once they realized exactly what was happening out there. So there was some advantage to having him there as well. But you're right, there were some things that I think that we saw, some steps in the right direction. A full season of Lance Lynn was probably another one that exceeded expectations. Mike Minor, could he do it again? He was actually better than he was in 2018. And so you're looking at two really, really good starters at the end of 2019. And by some measurements, two of the best in the game, right, as far as where they were from a pitcher's WAR standpoint, which I'll be honest with you, I never was a huge believer in, but it probably was because I didn't put a ton of time into it. And then you start looking at how pitcher's WAR is calculated and the idea of the lineups that you're facing, with your defense behind you. And now you start to try to take out as many of the variables that really can change how your ERA looks over the course of a season. And you saw two guys that were near the top in all of baseball and better than some of the best in the game. So that was really encouraging. And the Rangers go out and they sign Kyle Gibson to a very similar type of deal. And you wonder, man, can they do it again, right? It's amazing to think that these 3-year, $28, $30 million deals could yield as much as they've had so far. And so they'll try to do it again. And then, of course, the acquisition of Corey Kluber, and you get really excited with Jordan Lyles in there as well, as far as a rotation, because this franchise has always been kind of known for its ability to slug, right? You think about the success of the 90s and into the 2000s, and somebody who had to come in here and face those lineups. I mean, it was really bad. Not that there weren't good pitchers here, but they slugged their way to a lot of wins over the years. And so the idea of the focus on the pitching, I think based on what we saw last year, kind of going back to what you were talking about, and those two guys who were very affordable, being impacted as much as they were, I think John Daniels and his team saw an opportunity to build on that. And all of a sudden, could they become a pitching-centric team, especially in the rotation? And the answer to that was yes. I think they were in on Zach Wheeler. They were not going to go as far as the Philadelphia Phillies went, but they were willing to spend some money. And then they really shocked all of us when they were able to trade for Corey Kluber. And so now that becomes where the focus is, I think, going into this season. The idea of a Ranger staff relying on starting pitching is a fun conversation to have, but yet there's still some damage to be done in the lineup as well. So I thought that what happened in 19 and the way they addressed it this offseason couldn't have gone any better. I know that they were in on Anthony Rendon and they couldn't get him to come either, but I think they did the best they absolutely could to give us optimism for 2020. And in a shortened season now, even more so. Obviously, health is really important, but I think this is something that might even play to the Rangers' favor if we end up playing 82 games.
It's interesting because the gauge I get from Globe Life Field is it may play as more of a pitcher's park. Mm-hmm. So when you make that transition and you get Kluber, Lyles, Gibson, now all of a sudden you're playing more so to the part of your new ballpark rather than playing the part of the old ballpark, which is a slugfest type place. So that could be also going in hand now I don't know how true that is, if it's
Mm-hmm.
still going to be somewhat of a hitter's park or a pitcher's park, because we haven't really seen any action on that field. But I think that's kind of interesting too. That
It is,
hitters are
and
saying.
something that Dave and I would talk about during the year is when we go play the Oakland A's as an example. The Oakland A's had a rotation that, for the most part, was a contact rotation, but it was a good rotation. And so, how did they build their team based on their ballpark and their rotation? Is that they had an unbelievable defense, right? So it worked out that way. It became really important, not just what they have at the corners. I mean, they have Gold Glovers all over the place in that infield, but the way that they could track it down in the outfield. With Pinder and Canna and Laureano. I mean, they have some really good outfielders there as well. So for the Rangers, and we'll see what happens with the ballpark. I know Joey Gallo's talked about it, but if it ends up playing big, there will be extra pressure on that defense, right? Because yes, it's a good staff, but there's still some contact there, right? You're not going to strike out 11 or 12 per nine in your rotation. That's not going to happen. And so there will be contact. And if it's a big ballpark, especially with an artificial surface, although everyone says it's playing really well so far, the guys that have gotten a little bit of a taste of it, and it could be the closest thing to grass that we've ever seen. If it is big and there are some turf bounces in there, what you can cover in the outfield is going to become really important. And so that's, I think, something to kind of keep an eye on. There'll be some pressure, I think, on those guys, whether it's, how much center field does Danny Santana play, or Nick Solak, who's an infielder, learning in the outfield. You have Chu, who will DH a bunch, but you're going to put him out there, and he's still swinging the bat unbelievably well, but he's also getting older. And so the idea of him having, really good range would be asking a lot from him at this point. And even though Joey can run really well, he's a big guy. And so there will be a lot of pressure, I think, on the defense, especially in the outfield. So you don't want to erase what you've gained, right? Whether it's big ballpark to go along with a really good starting pitching staff, but then you're giving it up on the other side. I say giving it up meaning you're subtracting from it by not playing that stellar defense. So that, to me, that's where we keep the eye on this year. Health, of course, is really important, but assuming everybody stays healthy, what this team, ultimately what their destination, I think, will be dictated by is how the defense does and how many runs can they really take away or give up. And if that number gets too lopsided in the wrong direction, then I think you don't get the same production that you might have got out of that staff that you'd hoped.
Speaking of health in that respect, Corey Kluber, because, his resume speaks for himself, but Corey Kluber hasn't really been on a big league mound since we're getting close to 13 months when he, against the Marlins, where he threw like 53 pitches and left the game. And he got very limited work, like 7 innings this spring training. So it really has been very limited work. What do you expect from Kluber this year? Back to his old form? Or
yeah, we'll have to see it. We saw it in spring training a little bit. He looked good. I went in the backfields and watched him throw one of his games, and sitting there with a couple of scouts and, thinking and saying out loud to the guys that I was talking to, that looks really familiar. Right, the spin on the breaking ball, the tightness, and he's one of the few guys that you actually just call that pitch a breaking ball because he does a plus and minus on it really, really well. Where there's times he can make it look like a curveball, he makes it look like a slider, sometimes even a cutter, and he has as good a feel for his breaking ball as anybody in the game. And that's really one of the things that separated him and has made him such a great pitcher over the course of his career. It looked really good, and he looked like it was really good. So the time off is something that nobody wanted, going back to last year for him, and now missing, this first half of the season because there's no baseball, but it's something that actually could play some dividends, some real positive ones for him. So we will see. You just never know until the guy gets out there, but he really looked like he was on the right track. It looked like he was in his old form. Backfields are not big league fields with big league lineups, but you look at purely the stuff and where he was, and I think everyone, they're tempering their expectations to some degree because it's the smart play. You don't want to be too hyperbolic, but at the same time, as we're watching him, people started to get excited a little bit. And like I said, try to contain some of that excitement, but he was definitely looking like the old Corey Kluber.
Who's your standout this spring training?
So I was only in spring training for like 4 or 5 days. So I didn't get to see very much until, unfortunately, we got shut down. But I would say Corey Kluber was probably one of them. I think when you look at, this team, the additions are veteran additions, right? And so we hadn't seen necessarily unfortunately, we had the game where we saw Willie Calhoun that was televised, where he ended up getting hit in the face. But you think about how this roster was supposed to shape up, and there really wasn't necessarily like, how's this one young guy going to do? Todd Frazier fit in really nice. I think from a chemistry and clubhouse standpoint, that does stand out. To listen to what guys were saying, to hear Joey Gallo say he's become one of my favorite teammates, and we weren't even halfway through spring training yet, I think speaks volumes to the personality and the differences that he can really make. To go along with the fact you have a right-handed guy who can slug a little bit, which becomes important to balance out the lineup. So he certainly stuck out, and they were seeing what they were hoping to get from him had already started coming to fruition before we even got close to the end of spring training. So I think that's something that sticks out to me. The games that we were watching, we still weren't seeing full games necessarily yet from everybody, but I thought the bullpen arms looked pretty good for the most part, and I think things were coming together. And if you're sitting in Chris Woodward's shoes at that point, I think he was really liking what he was seeing. I think Nick Solak in the outfield was an interesting one, and watching him a little bit in center and in left and trying to get him to where they feel really confident giving him those at-bats, because I feel like he's a guy over the course of had this been a full season that they would love to see 500 plate appearances from. And that would mean probably multiple positions, maybe giving Rugi a day off and playing some second once in a while, maybe sliding over to third, and where Todd Frazier would slide over to first if you had a tough lefty and you wanted to give Guzman or Bird. Like, that was the one battle we were probably keeping an eye on, who was going to play first, but obviously a couple of guys that were left-handed. I would say Greg Bird stuck out a little bit with some of the hard contact. I know the overall numbers weren't there, but all good things were happening. No doubt. I think the Rangers were I would say thrilled, but I think they were pretty content, pretty happy with the direction the team was going up to that point. We still had a little ways to go and a couple of camp battles to get settled, but I think everything was moving in the right direction.
Last thing, so this is going to be a shortened season. As far as an analytical standpoint, do you see some of that being skewed? Because I know one thing about analytics is it goes based on a percentage, so it doesn't really hurt as much as when you're looking at just whole numbers, homers, RBIs, all of that, when you're looking at even the average type stats, batting average, on-base percentage, OPS. But we've seen, like, for instance, Rougned Odor had a really struggling early season up to about August and September, and then finally 2 months kind of broke it in. Do you see maybe this team going a little bit, as far as evaluating seasons go, a little bit easier on these guys because of this current situation that we're in? Or is this, this year 2020, this is how we're going to evaluate it, just like any other season?
Yeah, so I think that as far as evaluating the roster and how the team treats it, once they get back to spring training, it's full steam ahead. They're there to compete. They're there to contend. Like I said, I think it works in their favor anyway with a shortened season and having that roster. So I think evaluating players the way that it happens on the field compared to maybe the way that it's done, whether you're running your fantasy team or you're writing a column or you're doing a radio show or even what we do in the booth, we'll dig into some of those analytics, but we're probably talking about last year's numbers, usually for the first 3 weeks of the season anyway. And so, but I think on the field, the way that evaluation happens is, and it started last year, are guys making the adjustments we're asking them to do, like, using Joey again as an example. Can he cut that chase rate down? Is he really applying what we're teaching him about, hey, this is the spot that, you don't hit the ball nearly as hard, so we're going to work hard to make sure you're not chasing this pitch anymore. And we saw it from him. That's an example of progress that may not get you the numbers that you're looking for. So I do believe that with Woody, even though everyone's going to be competitive and they want to win, they'll be more process orientated when they're watching guys, because they'll know they believe in what they see. And, a lot of times we'll look at certain numbers, but this guy's hitting the ball hard, but he's not getting any hits yet. They're going to be okay with that. They're going to let that play out. And so I think they'll evaluate much more with their eyes. I think they do anyway. Analytics are really helpful in certain areas, and they may want to get an idea and say things like, man, it looks like Rugi's, hitting the ball middle in really hard. They can go, look, yep, that's what I've seen with my eyes is now backing up what I have with numbers. But I don't think WAR comes into play or something, or any kind of, defensive run saved, right, as far as when the idea of they're not making evaluations based on that, especially in a shortened season. When you're looking outside the organization, maybe to some degree, but I think they'll evaluate the way that they always have, which is where their eyes, do they have buy-in on what they're trying to get guys to do, and are they seeing the progress that they want to see? And then ultimately, if all those things are happening, they'll believe that the results will come.
Should be a fun season.
I hope so.
Waking up every morning, hoping, is that going to be the day where things are announced and the baseball world can rejoice and say, we've got it. We've got a plan. Not quite there yet, but it looks like it's heading in that direction.
Without a doubt. I think we'll be there. Things looking up. Hope we get some good news this week.
Appreciate the time, CJ. You can catch CJ Nitkowski on MLB Network Radio, Sirius XM, channel 209, channel 89, 209, who's part of the leadoff spot, which is weekday mornings at 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central Time with former GM Steve Phillips and Eduardo Perez. Also on Loudouts on Saturdays, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central Time with current AT&T Sports Rocky Mountain broadcaster Brian Spilborgs. And he also has his own podcast with Spilly, One Man's Trash. Did I get all that right?
You got it all right. The hours have changed a little bit on some of the radio stuff, but I think so. We're now 8 to 10 Eastern, 7 to 9. We're doing 2 hours in the morning during the week, but who knows? That might go back to 3 hours anyway. Everyone's kind of in flux right now.
You can listen on weekday mornings.
Yeah,
there you go.
In the morning.
There you go. Thank you so much, CJ. Appreciate the time.
Alex, you got it, man.